Welcome to Off the Page, and I'm Stephen Copeland. We live in a concerning age. Never in my life has it been more commonplace to caricature, demonize, label, cheapen, and overall completely neglect the God-given humanity of a person one disagrees with. In fact, our social media algorithms reward this kind of divisive behavior. TV ratings even thrive on conflict and hyperbole. The better the fearmonger, the more successful the politician. Long gone seem the days of decency and civility. This episode's guest is the brilliant Chloé Valdary. Chloé has written for the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Wall Street Journal, and has appeared on numerous shows and podcasts all across the political spectrum. From Real Time with Bill Maher, to Honestly with Barry Weiss, to the Jordan Peterson podcast, to the Megyn Kelly show. I'd consider Chloé to be a public intellectual and thought leader, and her lectures and interviews have received millions of views across the internet. I personally stumbled upon Chloé's work back in 2020 when the divisive rhetoric I'm describing had arguably reached its peak, and I was becoming increasingly exhausted. Even some churches and religious communities I found were playing this cruel game, positioning their own morality as supreme and stifling compassion and curiosity for the person whose political ideology they did not understand. In Chloé, I found a brilliant, nuanced thinker who, while engaging in extremely difficult public conversations, strived to root everything that she did in love and radical curiosity. She is the founder of the Theory of Enchantment, the focus of today's conversation, a depolarization organization that helps cultivate respectful dialogue and compassion in some of our most divided and polarized spaces today. Theory of Enchantment has three expansive and profound principles that can help bring healing to our many divisions today, and we dissect each principle in this fun and free-flowing conversation. This is a unique episode. Chloé is not a Catholic or a Franciscan, but her three principles of Theory of Enchantment have always reminded me of, and in fact, take me deeper into the Franciscan way. Chloé, like Francis of Assisi, is a peacemaker, and she has created a framework that has a way of uniting seeming opposites and making way for the other to become our greatest teacher. I believe these principles can help bring healing to our divisions and our relationships, as well as personal integration. This was one of the most, I'd say, mystical conversations I've had on this podcast, and it gets incredibly deep and even, I would say, beautifully dizzying at times. It was a lot of fun, and I encourage you to subscribe to Chloé's Substack or visit theoryofenchantment.com to learn more about the incredible work she's doing. Be on the lookout as well for my piece on her organization in a future issue of St. Anthony Messenger. This will be part of our Rebuild God's Church series, which seeks to tell the stories of people, organizations, ministries who are doing healing work in the world. Once again, no reflection segments this episode, though I do invite you to take time with the three principles we discuss and consider what they may mean to you and your community. As you'll find out, Chloé is absolutely profound. So as always, don't hesitate to hit pause and really sit and digest with something that the guest has said. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So without further ado, here is Chloé Valdary. Chloé Valdary, welcome to Off the Page.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen. I'm so grateful to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, so I know you've been asked this question 1,000 times, but I think it'd be helpful for our listeners to hear it from you. What is Theory of Enchantment, and why did you start this organization?
So I created Theory of Enchantment back in 2015. Originally, it was actually my attempts to come up with a framework rooted in love in response to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I studied the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in college. I am very much attached and deeply embedded to the Jewish community. So I'd been to Israel many times. I had been to Israel many times and hosted many Israeli speakers on my campus at the University of New Orleans. And I was very much perplexed by the challenge of anti-Semitism and did a lot of activism trying to combat anti-Semitism in college. But the activism that I did, while it was instructive, it was lacking a intentional rooting in love. And so I created the theory of enchantment after I graduated. I'm from New Orleans. I moved to New York, got a job at the Wall Street Journal, was mentored by Bret Stephens, and under that mentorship developed a thesis that I called theory of enchantment, that attempted to create these protocols, really, for speaking about Israelis and Palestinians. So the first protocol was treat Israelis and Palestinians like human beings, not political abstractions. The second protocol was criticize to uplift and empower, never to tear down or destroy. And the third protocol was root everything you do in love and compassion. So I developed this, and I worked for a Jewish nonprofit based in Jerusalem called Open Door Media, which provided Israel education through film. And I lectured around the world, really, on this new framework. And I did that for 2 years. It was amazing. And then afterwards, I went independent, and I was seeking advice from a lot of people, a lot of mentors, what to do next. And they were very much telling me, this doesn't just apply to Israel-Palestine, it applies universally, it applies to social emotional learning for high school students, it applies to, diversity and inclusion in the United States. So why don't you think of taking these 3 principles or protocols and transforming them into a full course? So that's what I did. I created a full course, which is a really amazing course. I'm actually very proud of it. It takes the great gifts of our pop culture, of contemporary pop culture. It takes, hip hop references and Black Panther and Disney movies and John Mayer songs and all of these things, all these rich things, these rich cultural archives, and creates this kind of apprenticeship for people to discover their being and to love their being deeply, for the purposes of not projecting their insecurities onto others, which I believe is the root of bigotry, is the seed of bigotry. And so I did that for a number of years, or I actually did that for a couple of months. I created the course. I spoke at a few different high schools about the course. This was around 2019, 2018. And then in 2020, I was sort of discovered by podcasters and companies looking for an alternative framework to mainstream approaches to DEI. So not the Ibram X. Kendi model, for those of you who may be familiar with how to be an anti-racist, right? Theory of enchantment was set up or positioned as an alternative to that. It was positioned as an alternative to white fragility from, Robert DiAngelo's approach. And that is how most people who know of me have heard of me.
Is that weird for you at all? Like theory of enchantment began with this very close connection with the Israel-Palestine conflict, and then yet a lot of people have heard of you during this anti-racist boom.
Yeah.
What's that journey been like for you?
That's a really great question. I think, at first it was weird, maybe. I think it was such a whirlwind, though, that I didn't really pause to clock it. It's actually weird now because I'm coming back, or I'm returning to the Israel-Palestine conversation. I'm returning to the Black Jewish conversation, right? Like I'm returning to that frequency, to that sound bowl, if you will. But I think ultimately all of these things have always been dancing with each other anyway. And as long as my sense of reality was disjointed, as long as my sense of reality is disjointed, as long as I perceive myself of this like categorical, individual, atomized being that's just like pressing something and then something happens, pressing that, as opposed to the fact that I'm fundamentally other, which means that I am shaped and informed. I exist in a web of mutual relations that shape and inform me, not the other way around. I shape it less than it shapes me. So, but it's still weird at times. Yes, to answer your question.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because those three principles from Theory of Enchantment, they strike such a universal chord that you've found. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you've found that they can be applied and they can be their own challenge in all these other spaces as well that are rife with conflict.
Yes, they are a kind of compass, I guess you could say, for true north. And it doesn't matter if I'm in, New Orleans trying to find true north, or if I'm in Jerusalem trying to find true north, or if I'm in South Africa trying to find true north. The compass itself will point me to true north. And I think that's why it's so applicable to. It's great because it shape shifts and it changes me. Like I'm in an active participatory relationship with these protocols, which might be obvious, but I found it's not obvious. So I think it's worth mentioning that. But yes, it's a compass that no matter what territory it is in, is a useful tool, and a useful beacon to point me in the right direction.
Yeah. I'd like to get into those three principles and then also this aspect of your journey kind of coming full circle, unfortunately, from October 7th last year. But first, I think our audience would be interested. What is your own spiritual background and how would you describe your beliefs and worldview? Really simple question.
So it's easier for me to describe my background than it is for me to answer the second question. But I will try. I grew up in a Christian home that is most proximate to Seventh-day Adventist in terms of how it manifests. So I grew up going to church on Saturday, not Sunday, but I also grew up observing all the holy days in the Old Testament, um, keeping basic kosher, found in the Old Testament, so not eating pork or shellfish. My parents, my father in particular, used to be a Baptist and, went on his own spiritual journey and came to his own conclusions that we're supposed to be observing the holy days and such that are found in the Old Testament. And so that's how I grew up. I grew up observing or attending a church that did church in this way. And what that did was bring me very close. I mean, it enmeshed me in Jewish culture, even though I wasn't really interacting with Jews for the first, I don't know, 17 years of my life. I mean, I had some Jewish friends here and there, but it wasn't as if it was this large milieu that I was a part of, but I was still connected through the rituals that I encountered growing up. Um, that makes me still a chameleon of sorts. Um, I find, and in coming into my own, I find, rigid binary ways of doing religion, not like morally wrong, like maybe I do, but I actually find them increasingly uninteresting. more than more
Exactly.
than
That's what I was
morally
gonna say.
wrong.
They're
Yeah,
boring.
yeah, they're so um calcified and hollowed out. And so now, oh my goodness, how would I describe my spirituality? I'm a multi-hyphenate. My spirituality is multi-hyphenate. I've been studying Eastern mysticism since 2020. I've been very much touched by the gift of Buddhism and even a little Hinduism and, pre-Hindu Vedic um, frequencies. I have a morning chanting practice that I do on a daily basis. It takes about 30 minutes. I am in an active relationship with sound and with music, and always have been, but I've been more intentional about that. So yeah, I'm a multi-hyphenate being. I am radically other. um,
What do you mean by that?
I've been listening to this really brilliant man named Bayo Akomolafe, who I highly recommend looking him up. He's Nigerian, and he speaks about how as he says makes this radical claim, which I find increasingly true, which is that I am not an individual in the sense that we think of individuals in modernity. Like I cannot excavate myself from the processes that unfold me. And I'm writing about this. I'm writing a book now. I'm writing about this, and I talk about, like, I had this encounter with someone who accused me of being anti-black, who accused me of not standing with my own, quote unquote. And my whole life has been a meditation on this, but this was a flashpoint of like, what does that mean? What does the concept of my own mean? Like, who is the first Homo sapien to utter the words my own, to utter that phrase? Like, my name, I am called Chloe because my parents fell in love with the Chloé perfume in France, which means that the sound that invokes me, right, the name that summons me into being, was in part formed in relationship between my parents, between these two entrepreneurs who created Chloé perfume, between rose and amber wood and honey, between the actual aromas and fragrances and plants that went into creating this perfume. So who is my own? Am I French? Yes. Am I Rose? Yes. Am I Port City of New Orleans? Yes. So like that's what I mean when I say radically other. And I'm like, I'm so grateful to have the language, like to feel the language flowing through me to be able to articulate this. It feels really exciting, for me to just talk about this in this way.
Yeah, what's so exciting to you about that?
It just feels true. It feels so true, but also enchanting. Like it's just something incredibly that is enchantment, and it's sort of like the theory of enchantment has been that compass that has been pointing me towards this kind of being for a very long time. And I feel like I'm getting into, not that theory of enchantment wasn't a practice. There've always been practices. There's a course, but I'm at this point in my life, I'm at the point where it's becoming deeper. It's becoming more practice and theory of enchantment. It's becoming like, oh, should I get rid of the theory of part and change it to enchantment? Like, do I have the audacity to do that? So it feels very much alive. And it feels true, not in a dogmatic sense, right? But in a way that I said this to myself earlier today, like, oh, actually, I'm finding that the truth is very exquisite. The truth is very exquisite. And that isn't to say that it's, toxically positive, but the truth is exquisite.
Yeah. Truth to me has always, I've kind of had an allergy to truth when it becomes dogmatic, however, truth to me has always resonated as expansive.
Yes.
Like this is something I can endlessly explore.
Yes.
Like the Christian mystics they would say that we are all one with God in a sense. And the spiritual journey is to awaken more and more to who we already are. But that is an endless journey deeper into your own isness,
yes.
your own dance with the divine. So there's truth, but then that itself is its own portal to self-discovery, to the Franciscans really elevate the discovery of creation, the discovery of matter, the divine really permeating all matter. I did want to ask you, theory of enchantment, that name for you, what is the depth of meaning behind that?
So I originally picked that name because when when I wrote the thesis, I was reading all these books about pop culture because I'm enamored. I mean, I was more back then than I am now, but back then I was enamored with pop culture. I was enamored with the observation that we as human beings gravitate towards certain pop culture brands like Nike and Beyonce and Disney and Apple. And I read a book by Guy Kawasaki, the former marketing director of Apple, called Enchantment. And it was about how Steve Jobs designed these really elegant, right, products. And for whatever reason, that word just captured, also because it's associated with Disney, it's magic, you know, that word captured, most closely approximated the feeling I was trying to communicate. Um,
Mm.
and today, my relationship with, I mean, you know, it's a constantly unfolding, constantly becoming practice. Today, that word is even more deeply resonant with me because there's song in the word enchantment. It's to enchant is to chant. Chant is the tree trunk of that word, actually. And now that I have a daily chanting practice and I'm in an active sort of what is it, devotional uh relationship with music and sound and voice, it means even more. That word means even more to me than it did when I first, plucked it to signify this thing that I was trying to create.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sound has always been a really interesting metaphor for me. Like Saint Bonaventure, Franciscan theologian, he played with this idea of fontalis plenitudo, which is fountain fullness. So at the very core of reality is love and goodness, self-giving of itself into creation, into this moment, into our lives, into our loved ones,
Yes.
and this is something that we get to swim in. And for me, when I sound feels like that to
Yes.
me, because it's rising up, it's rising up from this place, and it is there to be received, enter into, and maybe you sing, maybe you dance, maybe you just listen. However, it is such a for me, it's always just been such a striking metaphor of what I believe reality to be metaphysically. Do you have any thoughts there? Anything you would push back on or add?
I'm not push back. I don't think I would push back on it, but the Vedas, the Vedic tradition, and even like I think this is pre-Hindu. I was taught this by a very beautiful teacher. In the pre-Hindu Vedas, Vedic tradition, God is sound. And there's endless implication to that. And this has changed my relationship with Judaism and with Christianity and with all these other wisdom traditions that enfold me. Um, and it also has made me get really sincere and more serious about my voice and how I would like to um become become open enough and surrendered enough for whatever wants to come through vocally. Oh, so that whatever wants to come through vocally can. I know that as human beings we can be very, very shy. I know I can, insecure about my voice. Um and I have this really beautiful vocal coach named Marin Azaf who has taught me a lot of these things. And she says it's not that big of a deal. Like you're attaching too much ego to it. It is
Mm.
both like the fabric of creation itself, sound, right? Is the fabric of creation itself, and therefore not this like thing to get caught up in or wrapped or like do I sound good when I sing? Like am I performing? It's like precisely because it is the fabric of reality itself is why you wouldn't relate to it in that way. So I could go on and
Mm.
on, but those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I love. I mean, it's as you're talking, it's like that sound is within you already. Like there's this coming back to truth again. Like there is this exquisite truth within you, meant to be released in its own timing.
Yes.
In the second we begin to measure it or judge it or quantify it, it's almost as if we kind of strip it of its beauty a little bit.
Well, it disappears, right? This is like this is its elusive nature. One time I have a relationship with psilocybin, and one time I and one time I took psilocybin and I channeled a song and I called it the Lord, and it literally came through. And this song, I'll send it to you. It's on my SoundCloud, and it's completely a cappella, so just be prepared. But this song is me describing the manifestations of God, and it's me in conversation with God, and Goddess is saying, I am neither silence nor sound. I am neither this nor that, and it's me having a conversation with that being like, yes, but I am in human form, and I need because I am not a winter storm, right? I am not like, I need anchoring. I need you to anchor me. I need you to show up in a form. And it was a song that is truly a prayer. And I need to memorize it because I would love to perform it one day. And it's really beautiful. You'll hear it because I resolve it in a way by accepting the ultimately unresolvable nature of the question, which is a very Rilke, like thing to do. I ended by, the lyric is like something like, it cannot be captured, the truth in words that simply cannot capture the Lord. However, because I'm singing it, I'm not saying it. You'll hear it when you listen to it. Because I'm singing this, it makes it resolved. Because while the words can't capture the Lord, the song does. Like the fundamentally ineffable, immaterial, yet very physically present sound is actually that paradox is what captures the Lord.
Yes. Yeah. I love that so much. Yeah. Because a lot of mystics would say, like, like I don't know if you're familiar with the philosopher Peter Rollins, but he has a great quote. It's something along the lines of, God is that whom we cannot name, however, whom we should never stop speaking.
Yes.
So,
yes.
it's this dance of, if I'm tracking with you, it's this dance of, we know the song is going to fall short of fully capturing the ineffable. However, gosh dang it, you still have to sing it.
And it also comes very close. It comes closer. Song is closer, in my experience. Song is closer to the divine than mere words. There are some people, like poets, who can come very close simply by speaking. But generally speaking, I would say, for me, sound is closer. Dance is probably my first language and is closer. Could never fully approximate, but can satisfy my yearning for the experience of the ineffable, for sure.
Yeah, experience is such an important word too. It's something to be entered into.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, I think listeners are already seeing the depth of that word enchantment. There's wonder there. There is awe. There is a spirituality, a journey, an experience, a theology, even, if you will, an anthropology too. Like the
definitely
the
anthropology.
Wonder, yeah, the wonder. Yeah, you want to go into that? By the way, you kind of lit up when I said that. So yeah.
I was just gonna make a joke that I'm sure in a previous life I was an anthropologist. Like, I feel that deeply. I feel that deeply. Yeah, and some of my most favorite thinkers and writers are anthropologists or ecologists, people who are deeply in touch with the more than human world, and very, very deeply in touch with how the more than human world has shaped us as human beings. Like that, I live for that.
Well, even even the first principle of theory of enchantment, I mean, it has such anthropological depth that treat people like human beings, not political abstractions. So I'm curious if you can, take this in your own direction. But when I hear that and meditate upon it, it's like, yeah, this person who I may disagree with, this person who, maybe is absolutely maddening to me,
Mm-hmm.
that is a person with a heart and a soul and a mind. And all of these things have been crafted and formed in their own experiences that may have been very painful or traumatic. And how can I cheapen that person to a political
Mm-hmm.
abstraction? The person in front of me is pure wonder. There's a
Yeah.
story there. What are your thoughts and
Yeah.
what would you add?
There's someone recently, I think it was actually a Komolafe, in an interview with someone. Both of them realized that it's actually difficult, deeply difficult for us as human beings to be in relationship with the mystery, with the great mystery, right? And one of the first things I always teach in my workshops when I'm speaking about racism and what causes it and how it develops within us, between us, I talk about our inability to be in relationship with darkness.
Hmm.
And I'm actually curious to get, I need to know what the Christian mystics thought of this, because within the context of traditional Christianity, darkness is banished. There's a split, right? Darkness is perceived as evil, as a thing that must be defeated, that must be overcome. And there's in a lot of mystical traditions, no matter which tradition, whether it's Judaism or Buddhism, whatever, in a lot of mystical traditions, there's this other idea, which can be found in the book of Isaiah. Actually, it's the only scripture in the Bible that I've found that comes close to this. There's a text in Isaiah where God says, "Behold, I create light and darkness, good and evil. I alone do this." It's the most Taoist text
Hmm.
in that I've come across in the Bible. And so all of this is to say, many of my lectures and workshops have started out with an invitation for people to get in relationship with mystery, which is to say with darkness.
Hmm.
Right, with the darkness within their own being, which can never be fully comprehended, which can never be fully uh, extricated or controlled or isolated in the scientific sense of the word, right? Incarcerated, can never be fully pinned down. And then I use that as a launching pad to talk about racism, because
Hmm.
racism in the American context is an inability to take in the darker brother, right? The darker sister, which is just a reflection of being unable to absorb or be in relationship with your own darkness, right? It manifests in the European context as, historically speaking, Christians not being able to take in the Jewish brother. It manifests also as, which I find this fun fact fascinating, as Protestant Europeans not being able to take in Italians, right? And vice versa, of course. British and Irish. It doesn't matter. Like, the shape-shifting nature of darkness has nothing to do actually with skin color,
Hmm.
right? Rather, it is an orientation. It is a relationship that one has not been able to enter into with oneself. I have no idea. I don't remember what your question was, but
There probably wasn't one.
I will. No, there was. I think there was, but yeah,
It was
yeah,
probably
that's
just
my
me word
response.
vomiting and saying, "Hey, what do you think about that?" That's how most of my
That's
questions
what I
are.
think about it. Yeah, that's what I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, even in the Christian tradition, I mean, one reading one reading of the crucifixion would be that this man was a scapegoat. That
Yeah. Yeah.
this Jewish man.
Girard. That's like Rene Girard's
Yeah,
whole thesis. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's what you said is that it is an inability to deal with one's own darkness, one's
Yeah.
own uncertainty, one's own like, well,
Mhm.
this guy is coming about and he is like kind of pushing all the buttons and he's asking me to
Yeah.
rethink like how who God is and how like my dance with God should be. And I'm not ready to hear that yet, because I can't deal with that within myself. Therefore, we need to scapegoat them. But yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I what you're talking about. I mean, I see it on display in our political environment too. I mean, so
Mm.
much of the
Mhm.
hatred and the vitriol comes down to, I think, our own inability to accept those more complex, darker, frustrating things within ourselves that lack resolve. And so we we have to like kind of lash out, rather than
Yeah.
go inward. Not have to, but you know what I'm saying? Like
Not have to,
that is the
for
knee
sure.
jerk response, is to, lash out because I'm afraid of this thing within me.
And it's not just individual. And this is like a new download I've been having lately that I think is really important to bring in. And it's important to bring in because for me it gives me um it takes away guilt because growing up in a very dogmatic Protestant home, and there were many gifts and spiritual teachings that I received from my upbringing, but it was dogmatic. um Growing up in this home, there was a kind of guilt that I felt and a kind of constantly being surveilled and self-surveilling, to make sure I was good, right?
Mm-hmm.
To make sure I was showing up pure, right? Which is the Puritan. And it's not just my home, it's the entire American ethos, right? America is deeply, because it was formed by Puritans. And the problem, many problems with that, but one of the problems with that fascinates me is that the individual human being cannot take that on. The individual human being cannot take on, surmount the level of guilt, shame, etc., that informs them if they remain, I'll speak with I statements, if I remain firmly ensconced in such a paradigm. Like that will ultimately kill me. That paradigm will ultimately be my undoing. And so what I have uh slowly but surely come to discover is that there's this like lowercase s, and I'm saying lowercase as a way to actually honor the lowercase, right? There's a lowercase s salvation in knowing that I am not merely the atomized individual I think I am. Which is to say that if I am overcome in moments where I am triggered by someone who says something to me that's very harmful or very uh, painful, if I am triggered in moments to think other of them, think lowly of them, to condescend to them, think supremacist, which is, a compensation for smallness.
Hmm.
I don't need to experience that as me becoming a supremacist, right? I can experience that as the winds of supremacy just move through me, right? Like I don't need to actually identify that as me. I don't need to identify that as my own. I don't need to take on the full, I don't need to become Superman in my relationship to that. And I've been really meditating on that lately, and it's been a balm for me, and it's been a salve, which is funny because it's related to the word salvation. It's been a salve for me, and it's been medicine for me to really take that in.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have so many questions. Oh, where to begin? I'm trying to somehow succinctly bring together what you just said. and I'm struggling to do so.
Well, can I offer something? Okay, so I can try to clarify the thread, or like show the thread, reveal the thread. Treat people like human beings. What is a human being? A Homo sapien, right? A mammal, right? We have these aspects of our nervous systems that are millions of years old that we have absolutely no control over. Um, so, what is it? I haven't spoken about this in a while, so bear with me. But there are parts of my nervous system that bring me into fight or flight that I have no control over, that are 300 million years old in the evolutionary timetable, right? That evolved when I was somewhere, I don't know, as a impala in the African savannah. Like, there are parts of me that are not mine, right? That still shape me and move me, and that is actually what it means to be a human being. And so to treat people like human beings is a very deep. I said to someone the other day, it takes several years to learn the first principle of the theory of enchantment, and I am still learning it.
Yep.
Like, before we get into the second, it takes years to learn the first principle. So is that helpful? Does that tease it out?
Absolutely, it is. And I think that, I mean, when you hear those three principles from the theory of enchantment, it obviously invites you into a lot of inner work and introspection. However, I think what you're saying is so important for anyone on their spiritual journey, because I think there's a real danger to introspection if you don't have the awareness that you're speaking about, where, because at least for me, I can very easily begin to judge myself in that introspection.
Right.
And like you said, this must be who I am. I went in and found this, like, oh my gosh, like now I feel worse. Like, now I went on the spiritual journey and now I'm back, right back at my fundamentalist roots. I have a similar Christian background that you do. And now I'm judging myself again. So
exactly.
So now I feel worse, even though I'm trying to go in. And so I think that detachment is so important, that, hey, maybe this anxiety, maybe this depression, maybe this fill in the blank, whatever, like, maybe this isn't mine. Like, maybe this was passed on to me. It's still worth getting curious about. Like, but it's almost like that cushion of grace allows me to get even more curious about it and go deeper, because I'm leaving the self-judgment behind. Am I tracking there?
For sure. 100%. 100%. Yeah. No, it's really great. Really beautiful. The ways in which I have discovered that anger, depression, I always say melancholy is a very beautiful sister of mine. I actually recently wrote this in a Substack. I've felt melancholy all my life, like, since I can remember.
Yep.
And I've struggled with that. She's a tough teacher, I have found. But the fact that I'm able to speak of her as a teacher, to speak of her as a person or whatever, a force as a her, is a testament to my travels along this spiritual journey I have been on. There's a way in which what I am really calling for is devotion, right? This orientation of devotion to whatever greets you. And Rumi spoke about this, in his poetry, and many other great poets and artists have spoken about this or have expressed this in their work. The invitation here is, when you feel depression, as an example, and think of the embodied language of that, to push down, right? When you feel contracted, is to experience it as an invitation to commune with that force that is depression, right? And to consider that maybe the proper response to depression, and even to take something even more radical here, to supremacy, let's say the force of supremacy that moves through us as human beings,
Can you define that real quick, by the way? I've heard you talk about it before, but how would you describe this force of supremacy that blows its way, into all of our lives in some way?
Yeah, I'm still learning I can tell you the sort of psychological, I can try to explain the psychological language of it. The psychological
Yeah.
narrative of it is when I feel small and I don't know how to deal with my smallness, I project that smallness outward onto you, right? As a way to protect myself from the pain of feeling small. That's a psychological narrative. There is an unfolding happening in me that is going beyond the psychological, which the psychological has been an incredible. The realm of psychology has been such a deep teacher for me, and I'm so grateful to that realm. And that realm centers or reifies this idea of human beings as individuals. It's like solitary, right, individuals. And so to attempt to go beyond. So that's what I mean when I say, like, what is the force of supremacy
Hmm.
as it exists outside of my limited being? And it's an invitation to change the main to ask a different question about who is the main character here, to place yourself in the narrative where you're not the main character
Hmm.
in a radical way. In a radical way.
Yes, which that would allow you to get more curious about some of the other
Yes.
things that are pulling the strings in ways that you didn't know. Correct?
And that you have no control over.
Right.
And that you have no control over, and that is the portal to grace.
Hmm.
Right? That's the portal to grace.
Hmm.
The total surrender to the forces that enfold you. The fact that there are winds that carry pollen and viruses to New York City every spring that will end up inside the respiratory, systems of some of us, totally beyond our control, right? There's a, again, not toxic positivity, right? This is like, it has become so gracious for me to meditate on how I am enfolded by all of these forces that bring melancholy and joy and depression and anger and bitterness and the monstrous, right? Like, that is grace.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And speaking of grace, is grace the thing that leads to the second principle? Like the second principle is criticize to
Mm.
uplift and empower. So I'm curious how the first one, treat people like human beings, not political abstractions, and then the second one, criticize to uplift and empower. How are those two connected, and how does the first one help make way for the second?
So the second principle emerged out of a contemplation contemplation on the civil rights movement and how the movement, members practiced being persecuted. Like, they put themselves in these dojos, these training grounds where they would simulate what would happen to them once they got into the diners they were trying to desegregate. And so they had their peers call them terrible names and spit on them and, do physical violence. So to prepare themselves for that to happen
Hmm.
and still refuse to fight back violently. And in a way, the way that my very cerebral brain read that, or like conclusion summary of that was the second principle. It's like these people are refusing to, they're protesting, but they're protesting in a way that ensures that the other is not harmed, right? It's also very Jainist. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's very Buddhist, very Bodhisattva idea. And Dr. King, he went to the East and he studied a lot of Eastern traditions. And his sort of philosophy is this combination of Protestant, Southern Baptist, Tillich theology with Buddhism and Gandhi and all those things. So the second principle emerges out of that. I don't know if I feel very resonant with the way that is phrased today. With the way the second principle reads, I want to find a more poetic way to say it. When people hear the word criticize, they kind of contract. So it's still a possibility that that principle might change to take on more poetic language. But the idea is that once you are in a devotional practice with a great mystery of being, your own and the other, which of course is the same, then naturally you will be more inclined to criticize the other in a way that takes care of them. There's actually a limit to that principle, though, I will say. There's a limit to that principle in the sense that it doesn't leave room for the monster. And I am learning that a door must be left open for the monster. Alms must be laid at the monster's feet. And that's a hard teaching.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that, like, there's a very I think what I mean is, like, we as human beings need containers to express anger and rage. We need healthy containers through which to express anger and rage. And I don't believe in the suppression or repression of rage, or anger, or any of the bass notes, right? And here bass as music, not as impure, right? We don't have in our society the containers to properly channel, and those emotions must be given their due. And so there's a way in which one can hear the second principle and be like, oh, I have to never get mad at someone, or never lash out at someone, or never, like, express myself in a really angry way. And that's not what I want people to take from the second principle.
Got it. Yeah. Well, let me know what you think about this. I mean, but before we hit record, we were talking about Saint Francis of Assisi's journey during the Fifth Crusade, where he got on this journey, as I mentioned, to convert the Sultan. Thinking that he was gonna come back as this, like, great hero because he was he was gonna convert all these Muslims to Christianity under the Sultan's guidance. And what he actually finds out is that in not treating the Sultan like a political abstraction, which one could argue that's what he was doing by placing this label on him as someone who needed to be converted, because I have all the answers, right? So I need to, like, help this person find the truth. What he actually finds is by not treating the Sultan like a political abstraction and treating him as a human being with a heart and a soul and a mind and a beautiful religion and philosophy that could help Francis in his life, now there's room for dialogue. Now there's room for this, what is believed, maybe it's lore, but it's believed that they spent several days together and they probably debated. They probably, quote unquote, criticized. However, because they're seeing each other as human beings and not political abstractions, dialogue, now they can enter into this dance with dialogue. And that's when it becomes fun, because you're seeing the person as they are, and and they're seeing you as you are. So that in the comforts of that relationship, the dialogue, the relationship can hold the dialogue, even if it gets tense at times, even if there are these, like, really heavy bass notes at times, like, you're safe in the relationship. So am I on track there? Like, maybe dialogue is what that second principle is pointing us toward in some way.
Yes, and dialogue, dialogos, right? It's a very deep Greek idea. It's actually related to the text, I forgot what chapter in the New Testament, where Jesus says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there will I abide in the midst.
Yep.
I think in the original Greek, something to do with logos is happening there. And there's a great cognitive scientist named John Vervaeke, who talks a lot about this in his videos and such, and like the art of dialogos and what dialogos is. It's like to be in relationship with someone such that you recognize their constantly unfolding nature, and you can hear, or I can hear in that, there I will abide in the midst of that, right? Like there's something absolutely gorgeous about that we in modernity, very rarely get access to. But yeah, so I think you're right about that.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that you need each other for the logos.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
it's like
Yes,
we're
you
two.
can't do it alone. You can't do it solitarily. Yeah.
Exactly. So, Francis and the Sultan, or you could use any example, like you're going somewhere together deeper into the divine nature of reality. And
Yeah,
that's
that's
going
super
to
psychedelic. Yeah.
and that's going to be crazy, like maybe
Yeah.
you're even yelling each other at times, and it gets really
Yeah.
tense. However, as long as you stay in that place of we are human beings and our relationship can
Yeah.
handle the up and down of this
Right.
dialogue and the chaos of this
Right.
dialogue, we're exploring the divine together.
There's something really insightful that you just said that struck me just now. It's like I have to trust, and I have this challenge where I will feel very passionate about something in conversation with someone, and I will want to like yell or be animated, and I won't let myself do it because I don't want to. Whatever. I pathologize that a little bit, but there's an invitation here for me to trust the relationship, even with strangers, which is an edge for me. To trust that the relationship can hold that tension.
Yeah. I do want to be respectful of your time, Chloe. So let's get to the third principle real quick. And the third one is root everything you do in love and compassion. What's the connection here between the second and the third? What's the kind of movement here as we move into the third principle of theory of enchantment?
Let me ask you a question. I heard that Francis of Assisi, he would walk on his hands. Is that true?
Francis of Assisi?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I have not heard that.
Was he famous for that? I actually heard it through the Mumford & Sons song that I mentioned before we recorded it. This is relevant to your question, I promise. There's a line in, I forgot the name of the song, but there's a line in one of Mumford & Sons' song from the album Sigh No More where they say, "So come out of your cave walking on your hands and see the world hanging upside down." And apparently, allegedly, that is a reference to Francis of Assisi. Fact check me on that, people. And I bring that up.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
yeah, go ahead. No, you go.
Well, I was just going to add very quickly that whether that's literally true or not, the metaphor is apt. And of course, we wouldn't know if it was literally true or not because he lived in the Middle Ages.
There's no way to know, yeah.
But Francis, I mean, lore goes that he would like preach to worms, and like the birds would gather around him and listen to him. And like he was like Snow White in the forest.
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, just like vibing. Yeah.
Yes. But in a very real sense, and I think this is the important part, is that at this time where church was generally the only place where people thought that they could experience the divine, Francis was experiencing the divine in creation itself. Wasn't turning his back on the church. He remained a devout Catholic. However, he, in a very real way, he was walking on his hands because he wanted every single aspect of himself to be entrenched in creation because that's where the divine was. Yes. So, sorry, go ahead with the third principle, but
no,
it's a really
great.
Beautiful visual.
Yeah. So I bring that up because I play capoeira, and capoeira is this Afro-Brazilian martial art created by slaves who were taken by the Portuguese, brought to Brazil as a dance, or it masqueraded as a dance, but it was actually a kind of resistance against slave owners in Brazil. And it's this really beautiful martial arts form of movement and dance, but also fighting. You don't actually do capoeira. You don't fight capoeira. You play capoeira, which I love the beautiful linguistics of that. But in capoeira, you walk on your hands a lot. You do these headstands and these handstands and these kicks, and you walk on your hands. And there's this circular nature in capoeira, which I sense when I hear that Francis of Assisi. I sense that in him when I hear this about him, and I sense this in him when I hear about his relationship with the Sultan. And when we talk about dialogos, right? There's this encircling nature, not linear, which is very different, but
Yes.
encircling, enfolding nature that I experience as the nature of love. And so the third principle is root everything you do in love and compassion. I sometimes say that that is the culmination of the first two principles, and it is. It totally is. And I feel an invitation to talk about the circular dance-like enfolding nature of reality itself, which is what I'm getting at when I speak of love. And it's also the nature of agape, right? And Dr. King said agape, or unconditional love, Christian concept, right? And I love, just as a side note, I experience Christianity as this really beautiful, although fraught, beautiful marriage, or what is it? Dare I say, tryst between Greek thought and Judaism. Like, that is how I experience Christianity. That is then taken by the Roman Catholic Church and universalized. But anyway, with agape love is, I love you, like my love informs you. By loving you, you become a full person. Agape love is also like the type of love that a parent has for a child, right? By loving you, you actually grow up, right? By loving you, you become raised, right? Listen to the vegetative nature of that language, right? Even husbandry is like a agricultural term, right? And there's this enfolding nature of love in which one cannot help but lose themselves, meaning you cannot help but be changed through this type of love that I am describing, right? This type of love, which we've been describing throughout talking about all of the principles. You are forever changed by it. You are not in control of it. It is in some way outside of you. So root everything you do in love and compassion is to say, enter into this devotional practice with self and other, with the other that is yourself. And you will notice the enfolding will create in you this capacity for grace, will make you larger than life, not in a, arrogant sense, but it will make you larger than life, and it will humble you at the same time, right? Because it will put you in touch with the earth, which is what the word humble means, right? It comes from the word humus, of the earth, of the land. And I want to stress that this is not something, at least that I found, this is not something that can be ascertained or approximated simply through talking. Like, you have to dance in order to experience this, you have to, and Dialogo sort of, hints at that. But you have to dance, you have to chant, right? When you're chanting, you and the song are becoming one. It's a trance that's happening. And that is the nature of the love that I am describing.
Yeah, well, it's a really beautiful thing, Chloe. Like these principles and this organization that formed within you years ago, like you're still on that spiral going deeper and deeper into these principles yourself. Because
Yes.
of that, it seems like your organization and all the healing work that you do as a peacemaker, just like Francis of Assisi, you find yourself in these very unique situations, but because you're on that journey too. And I just think it's a really
Yes.
beautiful thing. So thank you for your time. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, or any invitation to the listener, or anything at all that I left out?
Well, first of all, thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. I've loved this conversation. It's been really beautiful. For people who want to know more about Theory of Enchantment, they can check out theoryoфenchantment.com. They can also follow me on Substack. Just look up my name, Chloé Valdary. I've been doing a lot more writing lately. I would also love to know from you, Stephen, if there's a book about Francis of Assisi you think I should read, because I'm very curious to learn more.
Absolutely. No, I'll send you several. So,
Okay, sounds
and,
good.
I'm definitely
Yes.
going to look up the walking on his hands thing, because it
Yeah, Mumford
it
and Sons, deep cut.
yeah, no, I'm going to go see Mumford in July, and I'm fired up about it.
Oh,
But
cool.
yeah, it'll be my
Very
first
cool.
time seeing Mumford. But thank you again, Chloe. Really enjoyed this conversation.
My pleasure.
Once again, that was Chloe Valdary, founder and creator of the Theory of Enchantment. You can follow her work on Substack at chloevaldary.substack.com, or learn more about Theory of Enchantment at theoryofenchantment.com. I've linked to some of her work in the show notes of this episode, as well as to our series in St. Anthony Messenger that highlights the work of healers and peacemakers, of people like Chloe and organizations like Theory of Enchantment. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks as always for your support. Might we, like Francis, leave our caves walking on our hands this week, experiencing the divine through our bodies, through the earth, through ways we may have least expected, as we learn to depend entirely on our Maker. Maybe the world's hanging upside down, but maybe that's the kind of paradigm shift Francis modeled. And maybe this is the countercultural approach that can bring healing to ourselves and to our world. As G.K. Chesterton wrote, Francis looked at the world as differently from other men, as if he had come out of that dark hole walking on his hands. Peace and all good, my friends.
I will lead you into the desert with me and tenderly speak to your heart.